And then I traveled a lot around the world, so I see myself more of a citizen of the world rather than to be identified with just one country.
Hello, I am John Brink, and we are podcasting on the Brink from downtown Prince George, British Columbia. And British Columbia, for all those guests watching us from around the world, is in Canada, in the west coast of Canada, is British Columbia. And British Columbia is a big province. And what comes to mind, probably for a lot of people that are familiar with Canada and British Columbia, the capital is Victoria, and one of the biggest cities is Vancouver. Where are we? We are 800 kilometers north of Vancouver, or 500 miles for those people in the United States, which puts us physically in the center of British Columbia, north to south, east to west. And so it's a nice day out there. It's around freezing, plus or minus zero. About 2 weeks ago, get ready for this one, it was 42 below zero. So
Wow.
a little bit nippy, to put it mildly. Today, very special day. We have an amazing guest. Her name is Catherine Gairard, and she is an artist, a composer, a singer, an amazing, uh, if I may say so, she is beautiful, and I say that respectfully. And Catherine, and Catherine is in Peru or in Paraguay, and she will tell us all about that. Catherine, welcome to our show.
Hello, thank you so much for having me here. It's a big pleasure. And yeah, right now I am in Paraguay. Asuncion is the main city there. It's a small country in South America.
And it lays between Argentina
Brazil.
and Brazil on the southern part of South America.
Yes, that's it.
So, Catherine, share with us. You were born in Peru,
hmm
and the capital of Peru is Lima. Was it in
hmm
Lima, or where were you born?
Yes, I was born in Lima, in Peru. My father is French and my mother is from Peru as well. So I have this double heritage from both the South American and European cultures. Um, and then I traveled a lot around the world. So I see myself more of a citizen of the world rather than to be identified with just one country, really.
Yeah. Now, on the other hand, though, things didn't come easy for you necessarily. You went through, you got your education, or you were born in Lima, grew up there,
Mhm.
went to school, and take us through that part of your background, the where you were born, and then the question that I have is that you must be, and you are naturally from within you, you take to music and singing. Those are a lot of the things that you already had the natural ability. So take us through where you went to school and how did you get to your career that you now have.
So actually, I come from a quite humble family. So back in the day, the lessons for singing and music and theater, all those things were quite expensive. And we also lived quite far away from the city, where in Peru, like everything is happening in the city, and then there's much less things when you go out from the city, right? So I actually didn't have like a natural talent for singing. I always loved to sing, but I was untrained, so obviously it wasn't coming out perfect, and I would have a lot of people telling me, stop doing that, don't sing, it's not your thing, blah blah blah. And I was like, no, I just didn't receive any lessons, so how would I be trained for that? How that would come out well, right? So
Right.
I just stick to it. and decided to just keep going. And I had to be very patient because for a long time I just couldn't start, and it was hard for me until I traveled to Europe to study in university, and I decided to just go for that path, and I just quit on everything else that I was doing to pursue music. And at first, I didn't have much money, so I just went on the internet and I found platforms like Coursera, for example, where I got several free courses on music, music theory, songwriting, composition, etc. I bought some books as well, so I started as self-taught, yeah, self-taught person, and then when my situation went better and I moved to Spain, I then took lessons with, like singing lessons with private teachers, and that's when I actually could develop my voice. And then during the pandemic, I decided to launch my career for good, because at that moment I realized like we are taking things for granted, right? And then something happens that is out of our control. So there's no other moment to live than right now. So I just took the decision because I was very insecure that maybe people wouldn't like my music. Maybe my music was too weird, quote unquote, or not like in the popular genre today. So in 2020, I decided to go past all that. I went on LinkedIn, I searched for people to work with. I found a producer that helped me get my music to a distribution ready level, and so I launched my first EP back then in between 2020 2021, and that's how I did it. So
So
yeah.
staying the course, not giving up, and then starting off from, as you said, humble beginnings. So did I. So and not feeling that you were, are very discouraged or saying no, forget about it. You're just not talented for that, or blah blah blah. And then still staying the course was obviously critically important. So your parents, were they musically inclined?
They weren't the most musical people out there, really. I grew up with like the radio music, normal radio music,
Right,
so
right.
a lot of things I discovered later. Although they really like classical music, so I listen to a lot of classical music and opera and things like that. Sorry, I'm just putting my charger. Okay,
Yeah,
that's
no,
better.
no,
So
no worries, Catherine. Yeah,
thank you. So yeah, I just don't know where it comes from because with
yeah.
the
Because
music that I was listening.
what is so unique about it, Catherine, is that like if I look at myself, I love music. I'm not talented, obviously. I tried to play guitar, but it never quite worked for me. But but on the other hand, I still love music, and then to get to classical music is a more. I didn't get the exposure to it, or most people don't. Although was born in Holland, and my family, we were quite involved in the community, and classical music is part of that. We had an orchestra in the city, and where I grew up, and so we get more exposure there. But here, we don't get all that much exposure usually, and to get to appreciate that particular type of music and orchestras, and especially the instruments and all the things that are combined. Classical music is an acquired knowledge, and then the more you get to know about it, the more you appreciate it, and so. But that takes exposure, and most of the radios here are, unless you look for it in particular, it's country western or popular or mainstream or whatever we call it. So, but in your case, to get to the level that you are in terms of being an artist, a harpist. Do I say that correctly? you play the harp, and then be a composer, and then obviously you have an amazing voice. I listened to some of your voice. You absolutely, totally amazing, and so all that combined, how did it all happen? And especially playing a harp, to that is probably one of the most difficult, at least in my mind, and I'm not an expert obviously, but one of the most difficult instruments. And then to combine that with what you do as an artist, a singer, and then a composer, it's so unique. And then put it all together, it's obviously, I've listened to what you've done, and it's just absolutely amazing.
Thank you very much for listening. Um, well, I knew I wanted to write music, but I just didn't know what type of music, because there are good pop songs that I like. I like Christina Aguilera so much, and think people like in that style. But I didn't see myself writing that type of music. I just didn't know exactly what I wanted to do until when I was a teenager. A friend of mine showed me a band that is called Nightwish. It's a Finnish band that, and they basically kind of invented this term of symphonic metal, where they will mix elements from classical music, like the lyric voice, operatic voice, and have strings and some sort of orchestral cinematic flavor to their music, added to the heavy metal guitars and drums, etc. And so I just listened to that and I thought, I want to do something in that style someday. So that meant that I needed to study about classical music, a lot of theory, orchestration, and of course discover more about heavy metal. So my family is not really a fan of heavy metal and rock, so there's a lot of things that I discovered later in life through friends and research. I love all the classic rock like Rainbow, Deep Purple, this type of thing, Iron Maiden. So it kept adding up to my arsenal of tools, let's say. And then I started writing, and out of all those influences and inspiration, things started to come out that at first I couldn't classify myself, like this sounds even different even to my own influences. So but at the end, it I am happy with what came out, because it's really, people say it's like different and original. I just know that I am very satisfied. Like, I learned so much, and all of this is transparent in the music that I do, which is very, very satisfying. Yeah, and
So
very fulfilling.
so when I saw the pictures of you with your harp, and obviously it's very beautiful, and then
Thanks.
I had to listen to you, so I went to Google and I put it on, and I say, "Wow! Oh my God!" I said, "Hey, come on, listen to this," So I found it amazing, absolutely
Thank you so much.
amazing, and I
Thank you.
appreciate, coming from Holland. I've had exposure to classical music. It's different. It is, and I'm not skilled to comment on it, and but it's expected to be the lingo that you use. But I find it to be classical, but not classical in the real sense. And in the combination of it all, your voice, and then you being a composer and the way you play, it's amazing. I was, and so the people around me that listen to it, it's an amazing sound.
Thank you. Thank you so much for that. Thank you for listening. It was a lot of work involved.
So, at what point did you start to? So now you got your initially growing up in the Lima area, and then at some point you started to travel, is that because of your dad's connection was France, and you would go to that direction? And then I know you've been in all over the place. You were in Spain, you were in Greece, and Amsterdam, Holland, and France, obviously. So, how did you put all of that together? And were you studying there, and then you spent? I don't. You indicated to me you, for a period of time, you were in Utrecht and Holland, which is
Mhm.
about an hour and a half out of Amsterdam. It's in the central part of Holland, actually, beautiful city. So
Yeah.
were you studying there as well, or adding to your skill set and developing it, or?
Yeah, so when I moved to France to study, I was in university and I actually thought I was going to be an actress, but I didn't really manage to adapt to the culture in France. Like they, not everyone, but some of them tend to be I don't know. I just in Peru we are very direct in our way of communicating, and in France they are more like you have to be indirect. Sometimes in extreme cases, even it becomes more of a talking on the other's back, and that's considered like the polite thing to do. Not every French people is like that, but many is general, and even French people told me that.
I
Um,
find it interesting that you say that, Catherine, because they say this thing about Dutch people. They are too direct. Say they like
yeah,
them, but
that's
we don't beat around the bush much. And other people, they go around in circles and circle and say, "Ask me the question." Don't keep.
yeah,
But
yeah, exactly.
some people take offense to it. But I don't know. It becomes a way of
Yeah.
life, and I still do it somewhat even here. Being now a Canadian,
To
obviously.
me,
But
it
yeah,
was hard. Yeah, to me it was really hard to adapt to that. And so I decided that I was going to do an Erasmus exchange to kind of get out of France at that moment. So I stayed in France for 2 years, and then I took advantage of the possibility of travel abroad as a student to go to Netherlands. And I actually had only two options. It was either Netherlands or Greece, and since I had taken the decision that I was going to pursue music, and I heard that in Netherlands, music is really respected as a profession. They don't see it as a
yes.
hobby, or there's always this cliche in other countries like someone asks you, "What's your profession?" and you say, "I am a musician," and so people would be like, "No, but what's your job really?" Like, my job is a musician, and they just don't believe it. They think that's like a expensive hobby, and
That's
that's
a
it.
that's a
Whereas,
hobby.
yeah, whereas
Yeah,
in Netherlands it's really like they respect it, like this is a profession,
no question.
and so that's the reason why I chose Netherlands. And then I loved that the people were very direct, and you knew there's always an exception, right? But in general you knew what the people is about, and I prefer that because then you know who you can trust, who likes you, who doesn't, and if they don't, then perfect. Just
So, now the interesting part, you now correct me if I'm wrong. I believe you grew up speaking Spanish, not
yeah,
Portuguese, but Spanish, right? Where
yes,
Brazil
Spanish.
is Portuguese, and your country was Peru was Spanish, and so
Yes.
then you acquired some French because of your dad, or you
Yeah,
could you,
it's
you could
funny.
communicate in French.
It's funny because my dad only spoke Spanish to me.
Yeah.
So and at some point I entered in the French school. You have French schools in Peru, and then there is where I learned French. And actually, everybody thought I was going to fail because all the lessons were in French, and at the beginning I didn't understand anything. But then I managed to learn the language, and so I survived the school. And yeah,
And then you went to Holland and you learn to speak Dutch. No, I'm just joking, because everybody loves to speak English in Holland.
Yeah, I actually improved my English the year I was there. So I survived with English in Netherlands, which is great. Um, you'll never get entirely into the culture if you don't learn their language, but even in English, it felt very welcoming to me. So that was a great thing. But it was hard for me, the weather. The weather was a hard thing. Coming from a South American country that we have very mild winters, like our minimum temperature is like 10 degrees Celsius. This is
And then you say,
nothing.
oh my God, that's cold. Now, I was born in Holland, and what I always say is to people that say to me, what was the weather like? I said, well, it's this way. It's the difference between winter and summer in Holland is that in the wintertime, the rain is colder. So, so now I came from that environment. That's where I grew up. And then when I was 23, I left for Holland, for Canada, and then
Hmm.
arrived in Vancouver because I wanted to build a lumber mill, and I wanted to start with nothing, because I
Hmm.
was academically I was not very successful. Let me tell you a little bit about myself. I was born November the 1st, 1940, so I'm 83 going on 84. And then obviously there was a war in 1940 and 1942, 1945. We were liberated by the Canadian Army, April the 12th, 1945. And I knew from that point forward, I loved the Canadians. They liberated us. And I knew that I would, if I grew up, when I would grow up, I would go to the land of my heroes. And then I was going to go when I was 17, and my parents wouldn't let me. And then I was drafted into the Dutch Air Force and was there for about 30 months, and then worked in the lumber industry there. And then I finally decided to go to Canada. And so, but I was not very successful academically. I failed grade 3 and I failed grade 7 3 times. And then they said, what are we going to do with this guy? Do we send him to the mentally challenged school, or should we get him some kind of a profession or a job? And so they sent me to a furniture factory, and I became a laborer. I'm proud of that today, but then it was, kids are hard on each other when they grow up, and a lot of the friends that I had, they would go to college and university, and I became a laborer. And, uh,
Hmm.
and so, but I felt just as good as everybody else, and I wanted to prove that to me. And so when I left to go to Canada, I started with nothing. I had one suitcase, 3 books, 2 sets of clothes, and I couldn't speak the language, didn't know a soul, and didn't have a job when I came to Canada. And I left Holland with $150 in that suitcase. And when I came to Vancouver, went to the immigration office, and fortunately there was a German fellow. And I told him what I wanted to do. He said, "Go to Prince George, where we are now. That's a boom town, and I wanted to build a sawmill." He said, "That's where the opportunities are." So I came off the bus here. I can still see the station here from my studio here. And I had my suitcase, 3 books, 2 sets of clothes, and I counted my money, and I had exactly $25.47. And
Wow.
but then what I had lots in attitude. No matter how tough it is, I'm always an optimist, and I think tomorrow is going to be better than today. Then I had the passion. Whatever I do, I give it 150%. And then work ethic, I work harder than anybody. And I've always done that, and I still do that today. I get up in the morning at 5:30. I always think I'm late. I always make my bed, and then I always give it all that I can for the day. I work even now still at 83. I'm still working. I've quite a number of companies, but it's not about that really. But I still work 60, 70 hours a week, I love it, and I try to stay fit, healthy, and optimistic. And the other part about it, Catherine, you've been all over the world. So if I look around the world and I look in Eastern Europe where there are wars, and in the Middle East where there are wars, we are so fortunate in North America and also in Western Europe and in other places, is that I fly around a lot because we do business in the States as well, here in Canada. And you were in Vancouver last March, and you've probably seen a little bit of Canada or British Columbia. Every time I fly a plane, I sit by the window because I look outside the window, I say, it's paradise. It's paradise. And I always do that. And so we are so lucky. The other part is
Yeah.
that growing up during the war years, we were in war for 5 years, and my dad was drafted into the Dutch army, and then the last that we heard from him is that he was seen the last time in Rotterdam before it was bombed. And Rotterdam is a big city, as you well know. And during the war, thousands of people died when it got bombed. And then my mother had me. I was born. My mother was pregnant with me while my dad
Wow.
was in the army. And then I had a sister 1 year old, brother 2 years older, and things were very, very difficult. And where we lived in the eastern part of Holland, during the liberation, when the Allied forces started bombing Germany, we were close to the border, and in the distance we could see cities burning like Bremen, Kiel, Hamburg. In the distance, we were close enough that in the distance we could see the sky being red, and then then day and nighttime bombing. There used to be up to 300 or 400 bombers in the air, and the sound of that is still something that even at 4 years old, I still remember that amazing sound. And what my mother used to do, take us outside in the evening, not to just kind of watch the bombers, but she felt safer outside than inside. And in the winter of 1944-45 was the hunger winter because they had cut off all the food. And it was also the
Wow.
coldest winter on record. And the three of us, the kids, would go with gunny sacks in the mornings into the railroad yards, pick up anything edible and burnable. And the reason that we did as kids is that they wouldn't shoot us, but Buddha's won, and then we came back the following day. And then I can still, even now, virtually 78 years later, I can still feel the feeling of hunger, and the same with the cold, because we had only a small room in our house that we could heat, and still feel that feeling. And then the other feeling, feel the anxiety of my mother, because she had to take care of the kids, and they say, well, how about everybody else around us was in the same situation? You didn't know what would happen next. And so the liberation, as I said earlier, was April the 12th, 1945. And it got pretty rough there because we were close to the German border. Saw far too much that we should not have seen. And, obviously affected us with PTSD. And then the inner child, where the fear of losing that one parent. And,
Mm.
but then coming to Canada, to me, was something that I look forward to. And I've been here now for nearly 60 years and built a business starting 50 years ago. And it's the land of opportunity, and, I love it. And the other part that I was
Awesome.
going to
That's
mention, the other thing that I was going to mention, Catherine, is especially, sorry, I interrupt you there, but that I believe very important is that a lot of people think that once you have war, that after the war is over, everything goes back to normal. It simply doesn't. That's not how it works. It could take a generation or more than a generation before it gets anywhere near a sense of normal again. And if I look at my family, my dad, when he came back, affected by PTSD, he never was the same again either. Neither was our family. And so the same happened to a lot of other people. So, but I always say appreciate democratic countries, although they may not be perfect, but it is much better than dictatorships or to be in war and to have peace and with all the challenges that sometimes go with that, I very much appreciate living in North America and as well as Europe, and the same to that extent in South America, I presume, as being relatively stable in Peru, and so. But that kind of shows you a little bit about my background.
It's an absolutely amazing story. Thank you so much for sharing it. Yeah, we today what I'm seeing around me is people sometimes getting anxious about simple things. Like there's no that much resistance to hard situations, not much stoicism, and so many people, especially young people, like they get anxious or worried about things that if you think about them is they are not going to matter in a year or two or even tomorrow. So it's great to have because um, hard times there's this saying that says hard times build strong people will build easy times, and then easy times will build weak people, and so weak people create hard times. So it's this cycle where we can only break it if we learn how to become strong assertive people without external situations happening. Will that be possible? I don't know, because diamonds need a lot of pressure to form. Otherwise, it's just rock carbon. So
I
we do need that.
I agree with
And
you, Catherine, is to go from challenges that are challenging and still and are for a lot of people. And as they go through that, and then they will appreciate the better times more than the people will that do not have had the exposure. And I find it important from my perspective that I have an obligation to talk about it because I was there and I've seen what will happen and what can happen, and to be involved and to vocalize and speak about it is very, very important. For young people that may believe that everything is fine, and not realizing that it's all fragile and it can change very, very quickly, as it did with us. In the beginning of the war, everything was fine. My parents had a young family, were just married, had already two kids and another one, and all of a sudden, war that changed everything for not only that
yeah,
generation but onward from that. But it laid the foundation to appreciate of what we have and to be more appreciative of it as we look around us. And I'm sure you feel the same about that.
absolutely. Like today, there are opportunities that even 20 years before didn't exist. Only
Yeah.
thanks to the internet, you can already like build a business online, do things. All that it takes is to have some dedication and discipline and a willing to learn. And I feel you were mentioning failing academically or at school. It doesn't really say anything because I feel the system is really made to mess people up, not to build people, to mess them up mentally, physically, but specifically mentally and emotionally, because that's easier to manipulate, that's easier to do things with, and it's not really meant to create leaders or to create creative people. It actually kills this desire for learning. And it's like, how do you grade someone? Even it's so artificial, like a number on matters that topics that most of the people won't even need, like in very complicated mathematics. Like, why do you need that? You are not, maybe you don't want to become a scientist. You do need some basic maths, but most importantly, for example, you need financial knowledge, financial, uh, yeah. And many people don't know how to do their taxes or how to save money or how to invest money, but they do know how to do a very complicated second degree equation or whatever.
So the part
So,
that I was going to share with you as well is that I always kind of felt that I had failed, because of, grade 3 and then grade 7. All my friends would go to college and to university. And then in Holland, the way it works is that, at some point you're going to get married and you want to build a house. And, and then if you get a job, then they say, okay, where are your diplomas? Well, I didn't have diplomas, So, and then to start from the beginning again here, although I loved it here, I wanted to start from nothing, with nothing. One suitcase, 3 books, 2 sets of clothes. I had $25.47. Couldn't speak the language, didn't know anybody, but I knew I would be successful, same as you did in terms of the things that you pursued. I knew when I came off that bus and I had 25.47, I knew it was not a question, will I build my own lumber company or will I not? That was going to happen. Even then, though, in 1965, it took me, when I came off the bus and for a long time didn't feel still in my own area, I felt okay, but still at difficulty, challenges with it. And then what happened is that in January of 1997, now I've been here 32 years. Everybody said, "Oh, you're so successful and you're this and that." I didn't feel that way, So
mm,
and so I went into a bookstore and I picked up a book. I still don't know why. And the title of the book was Driven to Distraction, written by Dr. Halliwell. And the book was about ADHD.
mhm,
And I had never even heard of it.
mhm,
And I said, "Oh my God, that's me." And so I
mhm,
wrote in the book in Dutch, "Now I finally know who I am." And so,
mhm,
and attention deficit is something that affected me all the way through. And obviously, a lot of times when I was in, as you already mentioned earlier, I was very good at some things, but not enough to fit into the system. So when I found out about that, and the more I found out about it as to what is it, and I looked at the Google and all the other kind of things, and it took me 5 years before I saw our doc
mhm,
that delivered our 2 daughters and was a personal friend, and he said, "Hey, John, why are you in my office?" I said, "I think I got ADHD." So we checked it out, and I do. And so the
mhm,
more I looked at it, the more I call it a superpower.
mhm,
And then probably we thought maybe 8% of the population is affected by it or benefited by it.
mhm.
It's more like 20% or more than that. That
Wow.
and Dr. Halliwell that wrote the book and wrote probably another 18 books, a doctorate and a PhD, ADHD. And and he wrote the book in 1993. I podcasted him actually 2 weeks ago on one of my programs, and so. But the point that I was making is that I was convinced that I was equally, not better than, as other people were, and not to be challenged by diplomas or no or the traditional learning things did not stop me from fairly quickly. I became successful here, then ended up within 2 years. I was already buying into a little mill, and then from there, and then build up my company, which is now 8 or 10 companies. And I'm not here to it's not a hoorah, hurrah, how successful John is, but more or less talking about the other things, and became very successful. And then Then since the time I became an author, I've written 4 books, and
Mhm.
and then a public speaker, and then the other part, Catherine, I love the internet and I love podcasting because there you sitting in Paraguay, I'm sitting here in central British Columbia, and be interacting like we are sitting in Vancouver and Yaletown in a restaurant, and we sharing our our history and our background. It is amazing, and it's only at the beginning, in my view, and uh, and
Yeah,
so and it opens up the world, and
absolutely.
and so that's how I see it.
Yeah, it's absolutely amazing. And ADHD is something that I sometimes believe I have, but I never wanted to test myself or anything, because I there was this person that was talking about business that said this thing. It doesn't really matter if you are, for example, an introverted or an extroverted, because what you want is to win. So how do I win? Okay, I'm an introverted, or I have this or that, but how do I win? That's actually the most important thing. How do you get to your goals? And many people, because it's the interpretation that you give it, like many people use it as an excuse. I'm not saying you, I'm saying in
Yeah, yeah,
general.
yeah.
And they are like, no, I cannot do this because I am an introvert, or because of this. And it doesn't matter. You want to win, just use your tools, use what you have. And
So what I should say is, that in my case, looking back to the war years, and that's why I kind of shared it with you, to, having PTSD, the inner child, I got the inner child, the fear of losing that one parent. I got counseling for that well into my 50s. Very emotional,
Mhm,
but amazing.
mhm,
And then, the other part with me is that I was not very good communicator because there was too much self-confidence. And everybody
mhm,
said, "Oh, you're so successful," and I could interact well in my own setting. But as soon as there were more than 3 to 4 people, it didn't work for me. But then somebody kind of suggested to me, and I don't know if you've heard of this. It is quite popular actually. They said, "Why don't you go to Toastmasters?" And
okay,
Toastmasters,
yeah, I know.
yeah, yeah. So, and I said, "What is it?" And he said, "Well, you just you improve your conversation, or your interaction, or your the ability to interact with other people." And I said, "Okay, but they're not going to ask me anything." No, 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 you know, they just sit down and then listen to what they do, and blah blah blah. And I said, "It's all good." In the middle of the meeting, they said, "Hey, John, tell us about you." I said, "Oh my God, I'll never go back here." So, but I did. I stayed there for 10 years, and I came to the
Mhm,
highest level in Toastmasters. That brought me to a
mhm,
distinguished Toastmaster. And so since that time, I've become a public speaker. I've become, but part of unlocking me and my background between ADHD, Toastmasters, and then since the time I started to write books, and then one of the books that I wrote is that I thought about it. People said to me, "Why don't you write a book? We have such an interesting life and all the other things." And I tried it for 20 years. Start, stop. Well, writing books is not easy. And so
mhm.
I did, and I started writing. And this is the book the first one that I wrote, Against All Odds. And it's not about how successful John is, but rather all through all the ups and downs. And then
Yeah,
the the other one was ADHD. The more I found out about it, the more I know it's a superpower. And so what I do is that I have 8 to 10 companies. I write books. I podcast. I'm a public speaker. I'm very, very active. And people say to me, how can you do all those things? I say ADHD. That's the reason. And so I wrote a book about it. And so ADHD Unlocked, very popular, and it's all on all major media, and so And and the book is interesting. You can start it anywhere, go backwards or forwards. But I had the discussion, and if you have an opportunity, listen to my podcast with. I'll just get Scott to tell me which podcast that it was that I did with Dr. Halliwell, and
Mm-hmm.
so I talked to him about it, and I said to him during our podcast, I believe that 20% of the population are affected by or benefit from ADHD.
Mm-hmm.
And he said, no, John, 25%.
Right.
And then the other one that I said, the other thing that I believe, and that successful CEOs, entrepreneurs, and this the ones that are successful, that is the operative here, the likelihood is that there is more than 50% of them that are ADHD. And he said, no,
Mm.
John, more than 75%. And I said, you're
Oh wow.
absolutely right. So
Makes some
that's
sense because most of them are like they have this hyper focus. I as far as I'm concerned, there is this part of ADHD where you have hyper focus on one thing and you could stay there for hours and hours, and I do have that. Like when I start a task that really interests me, I can't even forget about eating, and I love eating so much, but I when I realize it's like 6 8 hours already in that task and I hadn't even eaten anything. And successful entrepreneurs do have this hyper focused thing on their business, on their thing, and they are obsessed by it and they can't think about anything else, and they are fine with it, right? There's also this thing about having multiple interests or multiple talents, which was a struggle for me really, because then it's like, what do I choose to do, or how do I actually? There's always this feeling of I really want to do everything. I would like not to have to choose. Either do I finish my screenplay or my theater play, or do I finish my the 4 albums I am working at the same time right now? How do I organize all that? So in one hand, I don't want to have a label on me that limits me, but on the other hand, I'm curious, like what if I do have ADHD, and knowing function with that would actually unlock a lot of things in my life, right?
It's a superpower, Catherine. There is no question about that in my mind. And so that's kind of how I look at it. Talk to a lot of young people, and when I give presentations, and that's how I present it. And a lot of people look at it. There's virtually not a day that goes by that some people don't contact me and say, we have this daughter's son, and is really troubled by ADHD, and I provide him my books or send him to one of the other books that is available, or talk to them. And so whatever the opportunity presents itself, and I give a presentation, I usually mention ADHD, and that's what I say. It's a superpower. And I would and I gave a presentation to about a couple of hundred people not all that long ago, and several of the people in the room, and I'm a good presenter. I have an amazing memory, and so by the time I was done, I know there were several people in the room who said, "Darn, I wish I had it too." So it's an asset. It's not a liability, and I love it. But for all the reasons that you indicated,
You have to also believe it is an asset, because anything actually that you have in life, if you see it as a problem, then it will be a problem for you. Like I could say, oh, I'm so sad because I didn't have those things when I was younger, or I can say, thank God I didn't have those things where I was younger, because now I have another vision of the world that actually allows me to integrate those things that I didn't have back then in a much better way today. Or all those experiences are what make me the person who I am. And maybe I wouldn't be able to create the music that I create if I didn't have those experiences. So it's always on how you see it, because many
It's
people out there with ADHD who didn't do anything in life and they just see themselves as victims.
it's a gift, and that's the way I look at it. And I know I couldn't do the things that I do without it, and I love it. And but at the same time, it took me from the time that I was 13, left the school and became a laborer. It was a challenge, but I always believed in myself that I could. It kind of created my inward thing. I became an introvert, but I always was a happy guy, very, very industrious, always, try to make money, deliver newspapers or collect bottles or whatever it took to, and so was always happy and go lucky. And, but it took me from the time that I was 13 until I was 62 and was diagnosed, you know, and that was 49 years, nearly 50 years later. During that period, I did not know. I knew there was something, I didn't know what it was. That why can I not do what the other people can do, go to college, university, and anytime I was in business, I seem to be doing well. So what I find is with me is that I have an amazing memory, even now, and even the people that are around me say that. I'm very good with numbers, and then the other ability that I have, I believe, is that I can look forward, planning. I'm very good as in business in particular, but also in life, being a strategic planner, look forwards the next 2 years, 4 years, 5 years, 6 years, 7, 8 years. Where do I want to go, and how do I get there? And that works very well for me and gives me an advantage over a lot of other people. In fact, I should mention to you, one of my companies, we were looking for a senior individual. So I had advertised around, across Canada for this senior management position, and I added to the ad that ADHD will be considered to be an asset.
Mhm.
So, and that's really how I look at it, is that people that have that, is that versus what happens with other people. I have the ability to think outside of the box, and I always kind of look outside of the box. What opportunities, where should I go there, what can I do here, there? And it makes some people feel uncomfortable because they used to be in this box, and I seem to be wandering out and trying these other different things. But it has worked well
Yeah,
for me in business as well.
that makes a lot of sense, because also in entrepreneurship there's a lot of thinking about outside the box, and also following a path that no one would ever follow. And there is this idea, like for example, many people quit on the what is accepted as the socially acceptable outcome of life, like the white fence dream that you were describing, like go to university, find a job, get married, get the house with the dog and the cat, etc.
Yeah.
And entrepreneur people, they just want something else. That's why they do entrepreneurship. They just want to create a life that is like custom made, and people around don't understand, and it's like, what are you doing? You're wasting your time. You're just working on your basement and doing I don't know what you're doing, and until the results start coming up, and what they can achieve is, there's no limits to what you can achieve when you do a custom made life, right?
Everything is possible.
Mm,
That's the way I look at it. Everything is
mm-hmm.
possible.
Absolutely.
Now, Catherine, so we covered a lot of ground, and so what I'm going to propose is that, if that is okay with you, we're going to, once we post the the podcast. I have not talked to Scott or Andrew about this, but I like to do a piece of your music and attach it to the podcast. You don't object to that, right?
No problem at all.
Yeah. So does that make sense, guys? Yeah, yeah. Okay, that's what we're gonna do. So because because we could go on for another hour here, right? Uh, so we will do that, and then at the same time, we want you to stay in touch with us. And I'm going to ask Scott to make a note. Maybe 6 months from now or so, we'll contact you again. We will follow you on your podcast, and so it's an absolute amazing talented person, and also in terms of we have so many things in common. So
make sure you mention the harp in the picture in the lobby below.
do what? Oh yeah, okay.
I have a picture. That's from 1914 in Prince George.
Oh yeah, I'll be showing this to Catherine.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah.
Catherine, you see
Oh,
this?
yes, I'm seeing the
1914.
picture. Wow.
So that is
What?
in Prince George, hanging in just in the entrance to our apartment here, and we saw it when we knew that we were going to podcast you, and say, let's make a picture of that, and that is here in Prince George, and when was it?
1914.
1914.
Wow, so beautiful.
Amazing, eh?
Amazing. Yeah, where would that harp be today? Who knows?
Who knows, right?
Yeah.
Amazing. So we were thinking about you already last week and looking forward to our interview.
Thank you very much for having me.
Yeah, so it was a pleasure, Catherine. Let's make sure we stay in touch, and then
Absolutely.
it will come out tomorrow, and then we'll go from there. And again, it was a privilege, and you're an amazing individual, and and I want to stay in touch with you.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. Let's stay in touch.
Okay, Catherine. Take care. Thank you again.
Goodbye.
Bye bye.
Hoy vi la luna como perla en el cielo. El viento violento agita mis recuerdos. Mientras me alejo de mi hogar, viajé al fondo del abismo negro. Allí la noche destruyó los sueños que formaban mi hogar. Estoy sola, he de volar. Estoy sola, puedo cantar. He de aceptar la oscuridad. Volví a coser los retazos de mi alma. La lluvia fría susurrará mi nombre en el vacío de mi hogar. Estoy sola, he de volar. Estoy sola, puedo cantar. He de aceptar la oscuridad. La luz de las estrellas baila sola.